Ah, bonny Scotland. From historic battles to guard the Highlands, to putting on your Scottish finery and dancing to celebrate the win. You could be in Scotland, but journey with us to a place nae so far from home, to Penticton, British Columbia, to experience the wonder a world away, where there are sights and sounds and tastes of Scotland. See the traditional dances of Ireland and Scotland. Hear the skirl of the pipes as they'd echo through the Highlands. Taste the finely crafted whiskey known the world over. And feel the thunder of 100 pipers marching past. We'll take you backstage and behind the scenes. Come with us in this series of discoveries to experience the arts. The South Okanagan Whiskey Tasting Society leads a workshop, and we discover the subtle differences in this water of life.
I am joined by Nora and Ross, and the whole purpose behind this particular tasting is to kind of guide somebody who's new to whiskey, perhaps starting their whiskey journey, and has some questions about single malts in particular, which is what we'll be tasting today, and just hopefully dispel some of the myths behind it and have new people feel a little more comfortable coming into whiskey, because that's always a big hurdle. They kind of feel intimidated, and there's really no reason to be, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So what I have and what you guys have before you now, we've got 4 whiskeys, obviously. We're going to taste from left to right. Okay, so from your left to right. And these are all basically whiskeys that are geared toward the entry level, although people that have been in whiskey for a long time do enjoy them. They're kind of geared towards the entry level sort of person. They're a lower ABV, around 43% for all of these. So 40% is the bare legal minimum that you can have in order to legally be called a Scotch whiskey. So what that's going to do is we've got 3 whiskeys here, readily available. Not going to break the bank, so that, you know, if you're a little weary about spending a lot of money on a bottle and like, oh my gosh, I don't like it, you know, go in with some friends or family on one of these bottles or a couple of these bottles, you know, have them over safely, of course, and just enjoy them, get into them, talk about them, right? Because that's the great thing about whiskey, is the conversation it brings, and the people that it brings as well. Okay. So the first whiskey, we're going to, like I said, our first glass, on the left, we've got this here. This is Glenmorangie, or Glenmorangie. Okay, this is a 10-year-old whiskey, single malt. And right off the bat, you're going to get the name wrong. It's just one of those things, right? It's just too hard. In 10 years that I've been doing this, I still get the names wrong, okay? Don't worry about it. So, as I mentioned before, and Ross, you kind of mentioned it when you first came in. What's the first thing you noticed about the color of these whiskeys?
Different colors, totally.
Yes.
And I got to tell you that the first one, the Glenmorangie, if I said that right.
Glenmorangie,
is much lighter than, say, like the second one.
Exactly. You're right. And a lot of people seem to think, especially when you're new to whiskey, that color really matters in whiskey. It kind of depicts the darker the whiskey, the older, maybe the better quality whiskey that is. And it's really not true. You know, and that's one of the myths that we have. Legally, Scotch distilleries, they can legally add coloring to their whiskey. It's called E158 caramel coloring. So if they feel that their whiskey that they're putting together and they want to bottle this, maybe not up to the color they like, they can legally add color to it. So it could be a very young whiskey with lots of color in it, made to look very old, or have a lot of cask interaction there. So color really means very little, unless you're talking about whiskeys that have no color added to them. Okay, but you're right, and the reason why I picked these two, and we'll get into it, is simply because the casks involved in maturing the whiskey. So the Glenmorangie, this is a 10-year-old single malt from Scotland. This, I chose this because it's matured in bourbon barrels. So they distill the spirit and then they put it in bourbon barrels. And the reason why bourbon barrels are so popular when maturing Scotch whiskey is because by law, bourbon, in order for a bourbon to legally be called a bourbon, it has to be put into a new charred oak barrel, and that barrel can only be used once. That's it. So the bourbon industry obviously found that as bourbon grew and grew and grew, they were left with all these barrels that legally they couldn't use more than once and call it a bourbon. So Scots, of course, being resourceful, said, bring them to us. We'll take them. We'll take them off your hands. So then a lot of the use of the bourbon barrels came to Scotland. And bourbon barrels typically, because bourbon is a product of the United States, you're going to have American oak. Okay, is the wood type they're going to use. And that American oak is going to give you certain notes. It's going to give you butterscotch. It's going to give you caramel. Those are kind of, and vanillas, those are the kind of the notes that the bourbon barrel really brings to a whiskey typically. But if you don't get any of that, that's all right. Because the biggest thing here is as we taste this whiskey, your opinion matters just as much as mine. As long as you are giving me an informed, honest opinion, then we're on the same playing field. We're level. Don't let people intimidate you into thinking, well, he's been doing this for 15 years. I'm scared to say anything. No, your opinion matters just as much as mine. And I want to make that clear. And I like to make that clear to people that are new to whiskey. Don't be intimidated. So you can see here, glassware-wise, these are what are called Glencairns. These are typically, as you get into whiskey, what most tastings, this is kind of what you're going to have. But really, if you don't have Glencairns at home, don't worry about it. Use a whiskey tumbler. Do whatever you want. The whole purpose behind the Glencairn here is, you see that shape on that nose there, that glass. So that whole funneled shape, that's made to funnel the aromas up into your nose. That whole narrow opening. All right. And you can see here, I've got a different glass here on this whiskey. This is just like a mini Spanish copita, but same idea. It's got a narrow opening, and that's going to help funnel those smells into my nose. And as far as nosing, whatever floats your boat, whatever you're comfortable in doing, you know. Some people do both nostrils. Some people keep their mouth open when they do it. Some people go right in. I usually go right in there. And then right away, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Ross?
I'm smelling butterscotch, and I don't know why.
Okay. Butterscotch,
And
very
I thought
common.
maple.
Maples.
Yeah.
Maple syrup. Okay.
See, already you guys are off to a great start, because a lot of times, and I was that person, when I'm in a whiskey tasting, people feel very intimidated to speak up and say what they're smelling and tasting, right? So a lot of times there's this dead silence, right? And it's just a lot of people that are just kind of intimidated, a little worried about saying what they're tasting and smelling. But I find that when you're in a whiskey tasting, once the ball gets rolling, all it takes is for one person to just say something or hit on a note that someone else is getting or someone else isn't getting, and then the conversation starts going, right? So just blurt it out. Whatever you guys are smelling and tasting, even if it's bad, if it's negative, there's nothing wrong with that. This is your opinion. There's nothing wrong with it, all right? So Nora, as you get in there, you mentioned the first thing that you got a hit of?
Yeah.
Maple. Yeah. I'm getting pears, like light fruits.
Yeah.
A little bit of pear. A little bit of citrus, maybe a little bit of citrus. And if you don't, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Anything else? Ross, are you getting anything else?
No, I'm still getting the butterscotch.
Okay, that's fine. If that's all you get, then there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's all you get. Now, Glenmorangie, they actually boast having the tallest stills in Scotland. You may have heard that, right? If they have the tallest stills in Scotland. And, other than aesthetics, why would that matter? Well, when you have very tall stills, the shape and size of the stills matters a lot as to how your spirit tastes coming off the still. So those tall stills, being so tall, as those vapors rise up the still, what they're going to do is they're going to condense, and then they're going to come back down. So they've got all that travel going up, and then all that travel going down. So they've got actually a lot of copper contact, right? Because obviously the still is made of copper. So what that copper contact does is it actually makes a light, fruity spirit. If you have very short stills and not a lot of copper contact, you're typically going to get a very oily spirit. So even right there, from the shape of the stills and the size of the stills, they're already kind of directing how they want their spirit to taste. And all that comes into play when we look at what comes in the bottle.
Right.
Okay, now if that's it for the nose, let's go to the taste. Tasting's a little different. I want you guys to know that taste however you want, whatever makes you comfortable. How we're doing things today, this is all just suggestions. These are all just tried and true methods that work for most people. If it doesn't work for you, that's all right. Tasting wise, I like to do it neat first. Hold it in my mouth, move it around. Mix it with my saliva, and then give it a swallow. That's all there is to it.
I'm tasting the maple. Like,
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah. And is that because you're a big Canadian whiskey fan? Do you get a lot of maple in Canadian whiskey?
Yeah, could be.
It
That's
could
what
be
I
that,
grew up on.
Yeah, I mean that
so-
could very well be kind of where your whole palate is geared towards, that
Yeah.
sweeter mapley kind of side. Of which there are whiskeys that can definitely take you in that direction.
Right.
So if that's kind of where you want to go and what really works for your palate, just rest assured there are whiskeys out there that'll suit you great.
Oh,
Okay.
awesome.
So Ross, what about you for taste?
I'm still getting the butterscotch, but I'm also getting apple. Just a late apple, a late harvest apple.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's pretty common in Glenmorangie as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Very fruity.
Yeah, very fruity. A little bit of citrus, maybe a little bit of floral. Sometimes people get on it and stuff like that. Again, I think this is 40% ABV. I think it drinks really well for something that, at 40%. And basically, how you want to drink it is the right way to drink it, okay? Don't let people tell you that you're drinking it wrong. That's one of the worst things you can do as somebody who wants to bring people into the category. Don't discourage them, encourage them. And if you decide that you want to use ice in that, put ice in it. If that's what gives you the enjoyment out of it, it's your money, it's your bottle, you drink it how you want. It's your experience, right? Don't be afraid to drink it the way you want, and don't put up with people telling you you're doing it wrong, because there are far fewer wrongs in whiskey than people tend to lead you towards.
That was definitely going to be one of my questions. It's like, when do you or do you not put it on the rocks?
Whenever you want.
Yeah.
Absolutely, whenever you want. I mean, single malts work well on the rocks. If you want to mix with it, blends, your blends, these are single malts, they're not blends. Blends, obviously, a lot of them are really designed to be mixed in cocktails.
Right.
And cocktail culture is huge right now, right? So you drink it however you want to drink it. But I always advise neat first, and then let's add a little bit of water, and then just see where that takes us, okay? So you've got water in front of you, and there's any way you want to do it. You kind of decide what it's doing for you. You kind of decide how much water you're comfortable adding. But I would typically say kind of go slow with the water at first, right? You don't want to drown the whiskey a little bit. So you do have straws. You can see Ross there kind of just piping the water into the whiskey there. So you can do that. A lot of people will just pour it in the cap and kind of just pour it in the whiskey. I've got a little dropper here. So whatever gets the water in there is just fine. So I'm just going to add a few drops. Give it a little bit of swirl around. And right away, I notice a difference. I don't know about you guys. That sharpness is gone for
Yes.
me. Okay, it killed some of that sharpness. Those fruit notes are still there. They're not as sweet now, though. Okay, for me, I don't know. Nora, did it do anything? Did it change at all? Because sometimes they don't change.
It made it smoother,
Yeah,
a little bit smoother.
a little bit smoother. But are you still getting a little bit of complexity? You're still getting that maple in there? Is it still there, or is it gone?
It's not near as strong as before.
Yeah. And then Ross, still the butterscotch kind of the dominant factor there still? or
Not
is-
necessarily. No,
Okay.
it's starting to go. It is smoother,
Yeah.
but I'm starting to feel. I taste woody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not
That's great.
necessarily the peat, but
Wood. Yeah.
wood.
Absolutely. And you'll see, depending on the casks they use, the type of casks, wood becomes very, very common when we're tasting whiskey. It plays a big part. Those wood tannins, those oily kind of tannins from wood, right? So
I'm surprised that just that little bit of water made a difference. Like I would have thought you would add quite a bit of water.
No.
Just a little bit of water just makes a huge difference.
yes, and if you're fortunate enough to have and taste very old whiskey, it's okay to add water to old whiskey, like we're talking 20, 25, 30, 35-year-old whiskey, but you really want to be very careful because old whiskey can be quite fragile. And you can really drown it quite easily. Yeah. So that's just one thing people kind of need to be aware of is just, I think you guys did it perfectly because I think, it's working well for your palates, I'm assuming, and you were kind of surprised. So, keep that in mind. The water in this one, and not all of them, we'll see, it makes a difference, okay? So keep that in mind, and as we go along, kind of keep track of the back of your head, your favorites. That's gonna come into play a little bit as well. So we're gonna move on to number 2. Okay, so Ross, you mentioned as soon as you came in, number 2, different color, right?
Yeah.
And this is Glendronic. 12 year. Glendronic, we talked about the Glenmorangie. This is being matured in exclusively in bourbon barrels, ex-bourbon barrels. This is matured into exclusive sherry barrels. All right, so obviously you may be familiar with sherry, right, from Spain, although it's made in other parts of the world. Sherry has a very distinct flavor as well, and a very dark, rich, fortified wine, and that's what we're getting here, right? Whether or not this is natural color, I typically say if it doesn't say on the bottle that it's natural color, assume that it isn't.
Okay.
But the reason why I chose this whiskey is because it gives you a good contrast of just, this is the cask at work here. That's that darker willet. Not necessarily age. This is only 2 years older than that one, but and it is considerably darker, okay? Now with sherry, you're going to get a whole new set of flavors as well, or you may not, but typically you do. Sherry, very popular in the early 1900s, and sherry barrels were always used to mature Scotch whiskey, but really came into prominence probably in the early 1900s, where the demand for sherry was quite high in England and Scotland, and they found that once the sherry barrels were empty, because that's how they were consumed in barrels, once they found that they were empty, it was just cost prohibitive for them to ship the barrels back and to get them filled with sherry and brought back again. So again, they're left with these barrels that they don't necessarily want to have anything to do with, and then the Scotch whiskey industry comes up again and says,
Recycling at its best.
it is. Well, we can find a
and it
use for them.
doesn't cost them that
Yes, we'll take, we'll take your sherry barrels. And so that was really the start of the big boom that we see in sherry maturation in whiskey, and Scotch whiskey. So let's go into number 2 here.
I have a question.
Yep.
So we don't need to clean our palate or something in
Oh yes, you know,
between?
that's a great question. That's
In
absolutely
between?
right. Yeah, that's what the water's for. If you want to clean your palate, water typically works well if you have crackers, anything dry that's not going to add any flavor, anything like that, unsalted, anything like that. Just to kind of cleanse the palate a little bit. So that's actually great that you brought that up. So
I'd be so confused between the first and the second.
yeah, and one of the big things too is take your time. Right, you were in no rush, whether you're at home by yourself or whether you're among friends. Whiskey's just meant to be enjoyed slowly, with great conversation and great company, and don't rush it and drink responsibly. It's a far more enjoyable experience if you do it that way by far. So, number 2,
All right.
right away there's a difference on the nose to me. So Ross, right away you kind of like that. So what are you getting?
Oh,
on
it's
the nose?
completely different than the first one.
Yeah.
I'm getting fruity stuff, but over top of that, I'm getting something else, and I can't put my finger on it.
So yes, the bane of every whiskey taster, and yes, it's just there's something there, but I can't put my finger on it. I've been there so many times.
And I hope it wasn't you telling me, but it hit me. It smells a little like wine. So it's back to that. I can actually smell kind of wine.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And wine barrels.
Yeah, it's weird, eh?
Yeah. Wine maturation has become very big. Your port cask finishes and stuff like that. And Madeira, things like that. Those are becoming very popular. So right away, typically sherry, you get fruity notes, like you mentioned, Ross,
like
but it's a darker fruit.
Yeah.
Yes.
You get raisins typically. You get grapes, raisins, dates, sometimes chocolate or cocoa, things like that. So you can tell right away now the difference between the bourbon barrel and the sherry barrel, right? And
Yes.
the impact that it has on flavor and aroma.
Huge impact,
Yeah.
yes.
And this one I believe is 43% ABV for that one. So just a little bit higher ABV on that. Taste. Oh, one of my favorites, definitely.
It's nice.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
It's nice.
yeah,
That's great.
Yeah.
yeah. So we'll go with you, Nora, this time. Like taste-wise, what are you getting
Yeah,
for
it's-
notes?
Okay, and again, I'm not a taster, but this
Well, you're a taster.
this throws me off because the first one I just instinctively went to the back of the mouth, and
yeah.
this one I'm like at the middle,
Yeah.
and I have no idea why. I'm not doing it consciously. It's just
No.
my mouth is just doing
And
it.
you nailed a great point, is that different whiskeys, bourbons, whatever, and just the whiskeys we have here, they hit your palate differently.
Yeah.
Some really hit you back here, some are more forward on the palate.
Yeah.
Really, I don't know personally, there may be reasons why. I'm not aware of the actual scientific reason why that may be. But of course, the different parts on your palate, it's going to come across differently. And yeah, you're right. This one I felt further back.
The first one I felt further back.
See, I'm the opposite on this one.
Mine
Yeah.
is further forward on
You
this one.
did, yeah. See, so I'm the opposite now. This one I can feel right in here, whereas before this one is more forward.
Fair enough, and that's exactly what I'm finding too. The first one was much far forward. There was no after finish.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
No aftertaste.
Yeah, on the first one, yeah.
It was there and gone.
Oh,
Yep.
man,
This
I
one
like this
is a little bit further back, and it's staying. I'm still tasting it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's quite enjoyable. That's called, like you said, some people call it the aftertaste. Some people I call it the finish, right? So typically, when you're tasting whiskey, if you want to get technical, you've got the arrival, right? That initial hit on your palate. What are you getting? The arrival, and then the development. So past that initial hit, then what is it changing to, or is it changing at all, right? And then, like Ross said, it leads into the finish. So typically the arrival, development, and finish,
Wow.
right? And there,
So much to think about
yes, there is.
while you're having.
Well, you're having good scotch.
So there, now going back to this one, it didn't hit me in the back. Now it's very mid palate. The taste and flavors are still there. It's very enjoyable. I forgot how much I really enjoyed this actually. So it's been a while since I had it.
And, I know that you told us it was in sherry barrels, but I really do feel like I'm tasting the sherry as
You
well.
are,
Like
yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
Or the dark fruit,
Yeah.
like dates. I like.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And everything from the size of the barrel to and things like that. Typically, there's no general consensus on this or definitive number, but the general consensus is that between 60 to 80% of the flavor that you're getting comes from the barrel. So barrel quality is hugely important in whiskey, right? And color, obviously, if you're dealing with one that's naturally colored and no color added to it, 100% of the color is coming from the barrel, right? So yeah, the barrel has such a huge impact on it. And these ones, I'm not sure. They could very well be European oak. I can't remember for the Glendronic whether it's still, we're talking, American oak. But even American oak versus European oak, you're going to have a difference as well. I talked about that American oak having kind of those butterscotch, vanilla, caramel flavors.
Yeah.
European oak kind of leans towards the more spicy side of things. So I had a friend that called me up and says, I like spiced rum, I'm getting into whiskey, what should I do? I said, well, if you really like your spice, look for whiskeys that are matured in European oak. Do a little bit of research because that's where a lot of that spice is going to come from. Okay?
Now, it may or may not tell you that on the bottle.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah,
so-
that's up to the distiller to decide how much they want to disclose,
much
right?
information.
There are certain things legally they can't disclose, right? So we look at the age statement on here. We've got a 12-year-old age statement. So legally, that is the youngest whiskey that is in this bottle is 12 years. There may be older whiskey in it. And a lot of Glendronic products, there actually is a lot of older whiskey in there. So legally, they can't disclose any of the older age products in there, right? Their ages, but if you're going to put an age statement on there,
It's the minimum.
it is the youngest that's in there, right? So, and this is kind of a bone of contention because there are people in the industry who want to push that and experiment more, but the laws are they feel anyway, are kind of holding them back a little bit, right? I myself like full disclosure. I want to know everything that's in there, down to the barrel type, down to how old they are, I want to know everything. That's just because
It's your passion.
it's my passion, right? and people come ask me, are you a whiskey expert and stuff like that? And I say, in no way am I a whiskey expert. I am just somebody who is passionate about whiskey and just loves talking about it and sharing it, right? That's it. In no way. I like to say Nobody in this room knows everything about whiskey, and nobody outside this room knows everything about whiskey, right?
Yeah.
What's amazing about it to me is we know the science behind it, right? We know what happens in distillation. We know the science behind it, right? We even know what's happening in the cask, right? So what's happening is that spirit, once it's poured into the cask, over those years, the temperature changes, humidity changes, that spirit is moving in and out of that wood constantly, right? In Scotland, a fairly slow rate. If you've got a really hot, humid climate like you do down in the southern states or in other parts of the world, that interaction is going to be much quicker and happen much faster and much more vigorously. So typically, whiskeys that are kind of distilled and bottled and matured at hotter climates, they tend to mature a little faster, right? So yeah, so that's basically what's happening here. We know the science behind it, spirit moving in and out of the wood, all that. But what amazes me is we could have 2 barrels exactly the same, side by side, with the same spirit put in it, matured in the exact same warehouse location for the same amount of time, right next to each other. And when it comes to time to bottle it, they're completely different, right? That's the magic behind it. We've got everything down but that. And so that's why these blenders are constantly trying barrels, because they're not all the same, right? You maybe lead to thinking that they are the same, but they're really not, okay? So that's what we've got here. We've got, in my opinion...
Now, would you add some water to
Yes,
this one
that's
as
what we're
well?
going to do now. So once again, you guys be the judge, what you're comfortable with, what you think you kind of needs, right? You can always add more. Give it a little swirl.
That's something too I never thought about. Just add a little bit of water, and you can always add more.
You can, yeah.
Right, because
And it changes the complexity.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Completely different.
Yeah. Sometimes like this first one, it mutes those flavors a little bit, but sometimes it completely changes it. So there right away, again for me, the flavors that I was getting neat are kind of muted here on the nose.
Yeah.
They're still there, they're just not as intense.
Yeah. Whereas this one, I really found I had the first one like 2 different experiences. This one, I just feel like I'm missing the first experience.
Yes. See, and that happens a lot, right? It doesn't change. What you've done is just basically taken those flavors and watered them down and diluted them and kind of decreased their intensity. So yeah. That's exactly what I happened to get on this one. It didn't change it at all.
Right.
It just kind of left the experience a little more flat for me.
Yeah.
So I prefer this one neat.
Yeah, it's interesting, but the first one, totally 2 different options.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I drink a lot of water whenever I'm doing a tasting. That's so important, not only to cleanse the palate, but just to, so you're not getting too out of hand. I changed things up a little bit. The order-wise is kind of gone a little bit different. So what I've done here with this third one, I've pulled what's called a blind, right? So I'm not telling you what this is, all right? So the great thing about blinds, and which is I love them, absolutely love them, is it strips away any preconceived ideas about brand, about age, about ABV and price. It strips all that away. So what you're left with essentially is what's in the glass. And this is what you're judging it on. And a lot of people, like you mentioned earlier, Nora, that you kind of feel you're being tested or whatever. A lot of people, when they do come face to face with a blind tasting, they feel like they're the one that's being tested, but it's really not. It's the whiskey that's being tested, right? Because we're stripping away all those preconceived ideas, and we're judging this solely on the merits of what's in the glass. So it's the whiskey that's on trial here, not us. So number 3, it is not this one. It's the one under the cover there. We'll get to that in a bit. So let's go into number 3. So right away, for me, a lot of fresh fruit. A lot of fruit.
Yes.
Yeah. Similar to the Glenmorangie.
Yeah, I would say similar to that.
Similar, but there's just more there to me. There's more complexity there on that one.
Again, I have the maple right away.
That's fine, yeah. So Ross, we're going to go with you on this one. Nose-wise, what are you smelling on this one?
First of all, there's lots of alcohol in there.
You do feel,
Yeah.
you're getting a lot of alcohol,
But I'm feeling, I don't know. I keep on thinking cranberries, and I don't know why. But
Yeah.
it shouldn't be, because.
Well, no, it should be. if that's honestly, if you're being honest with yourself and you're giving an honest opinion, that's what it should be. There's no right or wrong here, right? Then that's kind of the mentality that we're trying to steer people away from. Is if you wouldn't believe some of the tasting notes that I've come up with and my friends have come up with, but I'm being honest, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's an honest opinion. So if it's cranberries, it's cranberries.
Yeah.
You're not going to lead me to cranberries, but okay. But if that's what you get, that's fine. Anything else? Or is it just that alcohol is just kind of just in the way?
Yeah, that's seeming to be overpowering
Yeah.
for me is the alcohol.
Yeah. Okay. And Nora?
I also, just on the last smell, went, and this is maybe not a good thing, but soap.
Nope. Soap? No. Yeah.
Interesting.
You'd be
Yeah,
surprised how
something
people get soap.
Yeah.
That's very common.
Oh, see,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
just blew me.
Yeah. No. And and like I said, a lot of times you're relying on, kind of like sensory memories, right? Things from your
Right,
childhood,
right.
Yeah.
right? Things from experiences that you've had, and you're kind of going back to that. And if it reminds you of something like that, go with it, because it happens a lot, right, with whiskey. And, like I said, it's if you're giving an honest opinion, there's just no wrongs
Yeah,
here.
it's not that it smells bad. It's just
No,
when you
absolutely
ask
not.
what it,
Yeah.
it's just,
A lot of people think,
a
a lot of people think certain whiskeys have an iodine kind of smell to it, right? And you would think that's terrible, but not really. Sulfur. Some of these whiskeys, particularly sherried whiskeys, like sherry matured whiskeys, sherry cask matured whiskeys, they tend to have a sulfury note, right? Some of them, and a lot of people are really off put by sulfur. I'm not. I enjoy it. I enjoy that sulfur hit. So, anything else, Nora?
I guess my brain just goes that it smells clean.
Clean. That's
It just smells
yes.
clean.
You know what? And I would agree. It does smell clean. It smells fresh. Like what I'm getting smells fresh. It's a little bit of a contrast compared to this, where the fruits were kind of they smelled mustier, older, and this one is a much fresher fruit, more vibrant. Okay, let's try a
Now,
taste.
either he's a wonderful host, or I'm suddenly brilliant. I'm not sure which it is.
After a few whiskeys, we're all brilliant, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Go
So
with the brilliant.
Yeah.
yes. So I'm going to taste now. Oh. So Ross, I agree with you. There is more of an alcohol hit in that.
Yeah.
Okay. Me personally, I do like that alcohol hit. It's something I enjoy. Some people tend to think.
Oh, totally smoky.
Did it? Yeah.
Smoky.
Oh, I got a smoky.
Did you get it mixed up?
I don't think so.
Okay. So go to that number 4 and tell me what, because you might be getting the residual effect off that glass.
It might be.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but when I tasted it,
But you know
it
what?
was just sudden. It hit me.
It hit you?
Yeah.
That's right. And also we talked about that later, and that's a good point. Is like it just wanted to make sure that you weren't getting these, because you'll see with this whiskey, and we'll talk about it. These peated whiskeys we're going to talk about, they can really dominate. So I just wanted to make sure you weren't getting the residual effects off that. But yes, if you're getting smoke on this,
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
Unbelievable.
Are you?
nice.
I feel like I'm tasting smoke.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. That probably is not the right thing to say.
It is the right thing to say, because that's very common. For this whiskey, smoke, maybe not in that intensity, is very common, but if you're getting, then you're maybe quite susceptible to the
that.
smoke,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah.
just the way it hit you, I thought, okay, well,
Oh
this must be
my
the other one,
gosh.
but yeah, okay.
Oh my gosh.
See, that's great.
And I'm finding that it's finishing throughout the whole mouth, forward and right at the back.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll go. Full,
Yeah.
yeah.
Finish-wise, it's still with me. Like, it's a pretty long finish.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And it's right down the back of my throat.
Yeah.
I can
Okay.
put some water in this and try to.
Sure, try and just see. You never know,
Trust
right? It
me,
may
I-
be just enough for you to. This is going to be interesting when we hit this last one, then.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. So
Interesting.
Try
yeah,
it with some water here. What is that?
so I added a little bit of water, and it actually it changed it a bit.
Yeah.
Yes, it
yeah,
does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it made it a little fruitier for me.
Yeah,
Just add a little more water.
Do that as much as you need. Absolutely. Yeah, for whatever reason, that fruit intensity actually hits harder for me with water, which is kind of strange.
And I'm starting to feel peat.
Yep.
Peat is coming out in that.
What,
Yeah.
what's peat?
We'll get into that too, yeah. But if you want to go ahead, Ross, if you want to go ahead.
It's solidified dinosaurs, but they use it for heat over in Scotland. They also use it for brewing the whiskey, and then it's like it just smells woody.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. So this one, kind of just on its own. We don't know what distillery, we don't have an age, we don't have a price, any of that stuff's kind of stripped away. So let's talk about the first three. Out of these three, we're talking favorites. Okay. So Nora?
I'm gonna go with number 2.
Okay, the Glendronic's
Yes.
your favorite?
Yes.
Okay. And then your second favorite?
Number 1.
Number 1, the Glenmorangie. Okay.
And then this one. Yeah, that one.
That
was
one you
not
can't?
one.
Okay.
It's good.
And then Ross?
I'm saying with Nora.
Yeah.
Number 2, number 1, and way down the back is number 3.
Okay. So this is from Isla, right? Kalila. And it is an island off Scotland. And so what has happened is the Scotch Whisky Association, they are the governing body of Scotch whiskey. They make the rules which kind of make up Scotch whiskey, and they also protect the brand as well, because it's very important to them to protect their huge asset that they have. But also what they've done is they've also divided Scotland into certain regions, geographically and whiskey-wise. So these two that we had here, these are Highland Whiskeys. These come from the Highland region, which is the largest region in Scotland. And on that, we talked about Isla. Isla is another region of Scotland, and typically known for peated whiskies. Not all are peated there, but most of the whiskies are. And we've also got Campbelltown. I don't know if you're familiar with Campbelltown, another island off Scotland. And at one point was the largest whiskey region in Scotland. They had like over 30 distilleries there.
Wow.
But what happens, as a lot of places, what does happen is they were so hell-bent on just pushing out whiskey and putting it out there, the quality kind of suffered. So it we found over the years that consumers said, well, you know what, this whiskey just isn't good. So slowly over the years, those 30 distilleries have all disappeared, and now we're left with just 3. So Campbelltown, a very small region, and we've also got the lowlands. So we've got the highlands and we've got the lowlands as well. Back in the day, it was you were kind of safe to assume that if you're having a Highland whiskey like we had these, you're going to get a fruity whiskey, right? That's kind of what the experience we kind of had with those. If you're drinking an Isla whiskey, typically you're going to have a really smoky, peaty experience, right? So the whole reason behind kind of separating them geographically into their own regions was kind of like, okay, I'm reading the label, oh, this is a Highland, so it's going to be fruity. I'm going to like this. Or this is an Isla, this is going to be smoky. I don't want that kind of thing, right? But what we're finding now is regions have very little impact, and they really don't matter anymore. Because it's just, we have Highland distilleries making peated whiskey.
Right.
They're all kind of making their own thing and doing their own thing. So really, whiskey regions don't matter anymore. That's my opinion, right? Some people are the opposite. They think they do still matter, but really no. But back in the day, that's kind of really what the regions were used for. So number 4, Kalila. Peated whiskey, and then you talked, and in Ross, you kind of explained a little bit more what peat was, and yeah, peat basically is just a mass of compressed, decomposed vegetation that is mixed with the dirt that gets pressed over the years. And yes, they used it as a fuel source. Basically, was the only fuel source on Isla for years and years. And a lot of whiskey over the years, most of it was, almost all of it was peated, because that's when they dried the barley, that's all they had for fuel. So all of it would have been peated. So when we talk about peated whiskeys, let's talk about the process a little bit. So what's happening is we've got barley, right? Obviously, single malt, I probably should have talked about at the start. Single malt, we're talking single meaning 1. Malt, meaning grain, in this case, barley. So when we talk malt, we're talking barley. But typically 1 grain, right? A single malt. In this case, the malt kind of tells us, okay, this is barley. So barley is the single grain that's being used in this, 100%. And from 1 distillery, that's the single as well, right? So we've got that in there as well. So basically what's happening is that, picture this huge floor. They bring the barley in, spread it out on this floor. What's got to happen? Well, they need that barley to germinate, all right? So what they do is they soak it. They just soak it with water, and that barley starts to germinate. And when it starts germinating, it actually releases an enzyme, and that enzyme is very important in the malting process. So what happens is when they malt the barley, so they've got it all wet, they've got it germinated, and they want to stop it because they don't want the germination to go on because they're going to lose those enzymes. They need those enzymes. So they need to dry it. So they take that floor, they heat it from underneath, and they dry out that barley. Well, one of the fuel sources they use, and all back in the day, as I mentioned, the only fuel source they used, because it's all they had, was peat. Exactly. That fueled the fires. But that also infused that peat flavor, that peat smoke into the barley as well. So that when you put it in the mash, you grind up the barley, you add water, you add yeast. What those enzymes have done is they started to convert those starches to sugar, right? And of course, the yeast feeds off that sugar, and then as a byproduct of that, alcohol is created. So you can see how important that process is for those enzymes to start converting starch to sugar, right? So that's what happens when we're talking about mashing and malting and what have you. So this peated, right away, peated whiskeys are one of those whiskeys that most people love them or hate them. It's right off the bat, you know you don't like it. And you can eventually kind of gradually acquire a taste for them. But some people right away just love them, and some people just can't do it, right? And if you can't, don't be discouraged, because a lot of people just, it's not their thing.
The water that is used to sprout the barley, is there a specific kind of water, or is it just whatever they've got?
Yeah, whatever you want. I mean, they will, mostly if they can, they pull water from most distilleries. Obviously, are located near bodies of water, right? It's a great, obviously, source of water. And no, they just basically they'll get it from the lake, streams, whatever, and use that as well.
So it doesn't have any effect on.
There. You know what? That's a great question, because there have been studies. There are people say that water matters. I can't remember what the number was, but people say the water you use adds maybe 5% of the flavor of the whiskey. I really don't know, to be honest. I don't think it really matters that much.
Tough question.
Yeah. I mean, we've got distilleries in the middle of cities, right?
Mm-hmm.
That just pull city water in, and their whiskey is fantastic.
Right.
Right? So it is, as you probably know, with most things, Scotch whiskey, there's a big story behind it. They like the provenance behind it. They like that whole thing, right? But really, I think the water matters not a heck of a lot. Okay?
Okay.
So let's nose number 4 and see what we get.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even more so.
Yeah, see, Nora's like, not again. Here we go. Not again, right? So there you go. Yes. So right away, that's that peat. That's what that peat's doing, right? Giving that smoky kind of smell in there. And throughout Scotland,
I can totally get, though, that some people you would develop a taste for it. It's sort of like,
yeah.
It's like cilantro. And the first time you have cilantro, you're either going to love it,
Yeah.
But over time, like different herbs and stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? The great thing about it is, if obviously if you're new on your journey and peat just isn't working for you and you don't really like it, you can always come back to it. But the great thing is that there's a lot of whiskeys out there that aren't peated. So you've got this whole swath of whiskeys to choose from. So don't feel you're being left out, right? If it's not your thing, it's not your thing, right? So, and then Ross, what are you getting here?
I'm chewing old wood.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
It's very peaty. It's just like, no.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that kind of.
You know? Yeah.
What I find too is I don't have to put my nose all the way in. You can just
No.
Oh, you
You
can
can
smell.
Yeah, you can smell it, and it's
like it actually smells better, not going like just being on top.
And you know what? And that's working for you, so that's what you do, right? Exactly. Don't feel you got to dive in there because everybody else is. Do what works for you. And you're right. I mean, I'll have a peated whiskey, leave the glass out, and the next morning you'll wake up and you can smell it throughout the house, right? You just know,
It's
right?
infused.
It is,
It's
yes.
infused.
So yeah, smoke, a little bit of ash, even a little bit of ash
Oh
in there.
yes, I did smell the ash.
And different parts of Scotland that use peat, the peat kind of it kind of imparts a different flavor and aroma. The Isla peat is different to like the peat in the Orkneys. You know, so the peat in the Orkneys is very, very heathery, whereas the peat, obviously in Isla, is very dense, very, very smoky, iodine for a lot of the whiskeys, right? So, you know, even
I'm
the peat.
suddenly more interested in the map of Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And you know, we've got, you know, peated whiskey on Vancouver Island. We've got peat here, you know, in British Columbia, Washington State. You know, we've got peat all around the world, right? It's this great resource that we have to make peated whiskey. So taste. Yeah. We're kind of waiting for Nora.
Sorry.
And also very much to the top of my mouth this time.
It does, yeah. Top, okay.
Forward, and I'm sorry, I can't make it.
Don't be sorry. And that's what everybody, like, I have people that say that too. They're right. They'll look at me and say, "I'm sorry, I don't like it." I'm like, "What are you asking, telling me for? I didn't make it. Don't be sorry. I don't care, right?" But the reason why I chose it is because you can see typically these are the three different kinds of whiskeys you're gonna find, right? And they kind of it encompasses basically the most common types you're gonna find, right?
And when I first sat down, I thought that I wouldn't actually be able to tell the difference.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I really didn't think I would be able to have to.
Yeah.
And I'm so shocked that I totally can, and with your guidance, it's like, wow, it's
Yeah, and it's-
amazing.
it-
Really amazing. Very educational, very amazing.
And it's all from just this amazing thing, right? It's just this amazing process where the barrel types, still types, even the yeast type, the barley
Wow.
strain, all
No, I'm
those
just
things.
thinking the aftertaste too. I'm still tasting this
Oh, yeah,
one.
yeah.
After.
Oh,
wow.
yeah. There's been many a
I'm
morning.
still
Yeah.
tasting smoke.
Yeah.
Dead apples. I don't know why, but dead apples.
Dead apples? Yeah. There's been many a morning I wish I didn't taste it still. Like, but you can, absolutely, you can taste it, right?
Best line ever.
You can. But you're right. I mean, you kind of went along with what I said there. Is just you can see how this would really be quite divisive, right?
Oh, yes.
You love it or hate it kind of thing. And typically you go into that. But you can with all these whiskeys, any whiskey. The more you spend time with it, the more acclimated you'll get to it. Whether it's higher strength whiskeys, right? You'll kind of maybe gain kind of a loving and a longing for higher strength whiskey, right? It all comes with time, comes with practice, experience, right? And just being exposed to this. So let's add water, and don't be afraid.
I was
Yeah,
just gonna say.
let's add water, and you know, as much as you think. If it takes a whole bunch, put a whole bunch in there, right?
So it might make a total difference. Like
It might.
I know on
Yeah.
number one it really did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put in a fair amount, and it's still quite strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you
Still-
need more, put more.
And I still think that I'm chewing cedar.
Yeah.
Oh, it's-
Well, that's a
it's
good one. Yeah.
Interesting
Yeah.
now after I've added the water. It's I get more of the alcohol smell.
You
this
do,
time.
eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But definitely more palatable.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Definitely more approachable.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's better.
Yeah.
Still not my favorite.
So you can see why I saved this for last, right? Because it really wouldn't be fair having this second
no.
and then going to one of these lighter whiskeys. You just
No.
wouldn't,
Yeah,
the experience
wouldn't
wouldn't be the same.
appreciate it, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can see why typically in a tasting you want to leave your peated whiskeys for last. So when you're at home and you decide, you know what, I want to have friends over and we want to do a tasting, right?
Right.
Chip in on 2 or 3 bottles. 4 is a great number to start with. Have 4 bottles, 3 if you want. Chip in if you want, and just if you do have a peated whiskey in there, you know, typically, you know, kind of put it last, right? It'd just be easier that way to enjoy what comes before it,
Yeah.
right?
And
Blinds
now,
as well.
And now I'll start watching for these kinds of glasses.
Yeah, I mean these.
Yes.
Yeah, these are readily available. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them in local department stores and things like that. You see them, and you know what? If you just buy one and this is your glass, that's fine with that too, right? But you know, you will notice a bit of a difference. It does, and like I said, these are all suggestions. The way we're drinking it, the glassware, all that is just suggestions, right? This is kind of what works for most people. This is kind of like the industry standard. If it doesn't work for you, then please do what works for you. I can't stress that enough. I've probably been hammering that home and home lots, but you know what? It is one of those things where once you get into the community, it is such an amazing community. It really is. And, you know, a lot of people are intimidated. Women in particular are intimidated, but, you know, women play such a huge role in whiskey. They really do from the start. They've always played a huge role. It just hasn't been marketed towards women, and that's a shame because women are such a huge part of whiskey. You know, what's great about it, though, is once you get past the marketing, once you get past the snobbery of it, and you just have your own community and you go to tastings like this, you see how many women are there, how many young people are there. It's just really diverse, and you know it makes you feel really great because but what we see now is because a lot of the younger people are coming into whiskey and their palates are different. They like big intense flavors, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these higher strength whiskeys, a lot of these peated whiskeys are a big hit with the younger people because they pack intense flavor, right?
Yeah.
So that demographic is slowly shifting, and it's shifting the marketing. It's shifting the makers of whiskey to say, hey, we've got a big group of people here that want to spend money, but they like more intense flavors. So you'll see higher strength whiskeys and stuff like that, right? And that is, like you said, women have driven the industry like beyond its limits. They played such a huge part, and it's like I said, it's a shame they don't get the recognition they deserved. They blend whiskey, they've run distilleries, and they sell whiskey, all that thing. They've always played a huge role. And talking of water, the blenders, so when you're at a distillery, the master blender, he's blending these whiskeys, and he's looking at these whiskeys, and he's going, okay, you know, is this what it should be? They're not drinking it at 40%. They're not drinking it at 43%. They're watering it down to 15, 20%, right? So you need to keep that in mind as well. Even the blenders, they won't drink it at this strength when they're really at work, because that higher ABV.
Oh, good point.
Yeah, that higher ABV has a tendency to hide flaws and mask flaws. So they don't want that, obviously. This is a product they're putting out. They want to make sure it's consistent. So they will water it down to 15, 20%. And it'll make a difference. So if you need to add the same amount of water, twice as much water, don't worry about it. You know, the industry leaders, the people that make this stuff, that's what they do. Okay?
Which I love the idea. Before I always thought I needed to add ice, but really I just need to add a bit of water.
You
Just a
do.
little bit,
Yeah, and if you want,
I love that idea.
Yeah, if you want ice, try ice. Typically, and you
But
can
I
see.
think that was just, you know, back to kind of the myth thing, what you
Yep.
thought you were supposed to do. But you
Yeah,
don't
and if it
necessarily.
works for you, do it. By all means, if you like a little bit of a chill on it, you know, go ahead and do it. Why we're drinking these kind of room temperature and without ice is typically because
We're tasting.
we're tasting, but the ice has a tendency to close the whiskey, that chill,
Yeah.
right? Whereas water and having it neat, it has time to open up,
Yeah.
right? But really, if for you to enjoy it, you need ice, go ahead and add ice, by all means. So
That was.
we've got that. So
Cheers.
yeah, cheers, sláinte.
Cheers.
Sláinte. So
Sláinte.
we're gonna do again. We're gonna rank them again now that we've had all four. We'll start with you, Ross. Favorite to least favorite.
Number 2,
Yeah, Glendronic.
number 1,
Yeah,
number 3 further on down, and number 4 at the very, very end, falling off
that's
the table.
fine. So, but can you appreciate, even though it's not, can you appreciate what's there?
Oh,
it's
I
just
know,
not.
I love
yeah,
it. I
see,
mean,
that's great.
it's wonderful, but it's
Yeah.
just not me.
Absolutely, yeah.
Although I've got to say that our daughter loves heavily peated Scotch.
Yeah,
And
yeah. And then Nora, your rankings.
Number 2,
Yeah.
number 1, and then I'm opposite you. I would take the number 4 over the number
interesting.
that blind
would,
one.
yeah. Okay, that's interesting as well. So yeah, my
think-
order kind of stays the same. Yeah, it stays the same. 3, 2, 1, 4 for my favorite. So let's take a look at the blind.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm kind of glad deep down because my little experiment worked. So I was kind of fearful you all would fall in love with number 3, and then that would throw everything out the window. So we talked about preconceived ideas, throwing them out, everything like that. So what we have here, we've got a 35-year-old whiskey.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
wow, very
So this has been Romic 35-year-old. This is a $1,000 whiskey. Okay. And this was none of your favorites,
Yeah.
right? So and this was, and you mentioned there was some alcohol on there.
Yes,
This
yes,
is
yeah,
43%, but I could see where you were going with that. I did notice more alcohol in that. But there you go, right? I happen to love it, maybe because I know how much it costs and how much I could be very easily be led. But I just wanted you guys to know, right? Age means nothing when you're doing it blind, right? So
And this one was, what, a 35-year-old?
Yep, 35-year-old whiskey. So the youngest whiskey in there is 35 years old.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay, so there you go.
I've been to a few tastings, and of course, the one and only best trip I ever had is we went over to Scotland and Ireland, and we tasted around a few, but I never really did get any sort of complexity about what it involved. I picked up a few hints over there, but Chad is amazing over here. And also with South Okanagan Whiskey Tasting Society, I've been to a couple of them, and they are very, very good, very eye-opening.
There's always more to discover, and I've had the pleasure of tasting whiskeys that are, 53, 52 years old. And, I'll tell you flat out, not all of them are great. Some of them are not very good. But it's the experience. That's the thing that gets you, right? You're drinking a part of history. And amazing, you look at when that was distilled, and you're just blown away, right? And there's always more to discover, always more to learn. South Okanagan Whiskey Tasting Society. So I've been a member for a few years now, tasting coordinator. So I do, whenever we don't have a guest taster in, I'll typically run the tastings, but anybody that wants to step up and do it is more than welcome. But it's also been great for me because as I do background research, I learn, right? Which is, to me, is the greatest thing. I enjoy learning about it.
I was surprised on a number of levels, the different flavors you can actually taste from one whiskey to the next. My guide was incredibly informative about the Scotland and just all the different regions. It was a lot of fun. I actually didn't really anticipate how much fun I would have, so I loved it. It was great.
But I definitely don't know everything about whiskey. And it's very important to me to let people know that if you're new to whiskey, people like me, I can learn things from you. Case in point, we had a whiskey, and some of you might be familiar with it, but it's called Smokehead, right? Smokehead is a peated whiskey, an Isla whiskey, but they don't tell you what distillery it is. That's one of the legal requirements. They can't tell you. So we're in a group of tasting. We've got some people, some friends of mine. We drink whiskey a lot. We're very enthusiastic about it. But we have somebody who's new to whiskey with us. And so as we're getting in there, diving in, dissecting the whiskey, blah, 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 going full tilt, the person who's new to whiskey stands up and says, "Hey, do we know what distillery this is?" And I was blown away. And I'm like, that's a great question. We were just so gung-ho about just diving in. We kind of glanced at the most obvious question from somebody who's new to whiskey: what distillery is this? And it happens to be a very well-guarded secret, but still, that shows you how people like me that have been doing it a long time have a lot to learn from new people. Collectors versus people like us, people that are new to whiskey that just want to enjoy it. There's a whole big thing where people think that whiskey should be consumed and drank, and I'm one of those people, right? This is my own bottle. All these are my own bottles. I share these with you because
Thank you for sharing.
whiskey is for sharing, right?
Thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, you're quite welcome, and it was an absolute pleasure to meet you guys and to share this with you. Hopefully you continue on your journey. Hopefully in the future I see your faces, and we can do this again, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I'll tell you, I'm way more encouraged than I was when I walked in the door. I'll tell you that. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Very good.
Hey, thank you.
Good enough. Thank you very, very much, John.